Hi everyone. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Namaskar. My name is Jeevan Sharma. I'll be moderating today's lecture, which is being organized, hosted by Social Science Raha in collaboration with NHS Nepal chapter, that is Association of Nepal and Himalayan Studies. My name is Jeevan Sharma. I work at the University of Edinburgh, but I'm here in Nepal during my sabbatical. And it is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Professor Richard Bownas. It's pronounced as Bownas. He's currently a professor of political science at the University of Northern Colorado. Has been working in Nepal since late 1990s. So you have over 25 years of research experience of working in Nepal and India. He completed his PhD from Cornell in 2012 and has been conducting research in Nepal much more directly since 2014. He was a Fulbright scholar in 2024, and I think part of what he's going to talk about today is going to be based on a grant that he received from CAROC. Some of you may know about this, Council of American Overseas Research Centers, which is a multi-country grant that included Nepal. We don't know the future of that grant, given what's happening in the US in terms of research funding. But anyway, welcome to our speaker, who is going to speak for about 40 minutes, 35 to 40 minutes, on the title, which I believe dragged many of you to this room. Quite an arresting title: Creeping Saffronisation in Nepal, or False Alarm, an overview of Hindutva in Nepal. Richard.
Hi. Oh, sorry. Can you hear me? Is that good? Is that a good level? Right. So, well, before I start, I'd like to thank Amma BK for inviting me through the ANHS, and KAOC. So, thank you very much, Amma. And I'd also like to acknowledge Ratna BK, do you want to wave your hand, who is my research assistant for much of the research that led to this overview, which hopefully will be a published paper eventually. It's under review at the moment, so if any of you are reviewing it, please be nice. So, so this project about Hindutva, it arose from as a sort of side project during other research projects I was doing in the summer in Nepal and during my Fulbright period as a Fulbright scholar last year. And I've been putting it together bits and pieces over the last 2 or 3 years. And at the end of the presentation, I will suggest some avenues for research that maybe some of you in this room or colleagues of yours would be interested to pursue. Because I don't think there is enough grassroots research on Hindu nationalism in Nepal. Okay, so I'll start the lecture. There has recently been a great deal of attention paid to supposed Hindutva in the Nepali and international media, with many opinion pieces pointing to a threat to secularism from various quarters. The first PowerPoint slide shows 2 recent headlines from online magazines, Jacobin, which obviously is an international left-leaning magazine, and The Diplomat, expressing worries that Nepali leaders are aiming to end secularism in Nepal and saffronize the polity. And many other headlines can be drawn from Nepali outlets expressing similar concerns. For example, numerous articles by C.K. Lau, the famous Nepali journalist. So we see here from The Diplomat, this is 2025, Nepal's secular character weakens as agenda for Hindu state gains traction. And in Jacobin magazine, Nepal's Hindutva moment. For over a decade, Nepal has declared itself a secular republic. Now, militant Hindu nationalists are trying to undermine this by escalating local tensions into sectarian something, which is missing. Perhaps there is a parallel here to concerns that the United States is drifting towards fascism. So famously, Jason Stanley, formerly professor at Yale University, who has left for Canada, wrote this book, How Fascism Works. And obviously there are genetic similarities between fascism and Hindutva, historically, and in terms of their forms of action. In both cases, however, I feel there is a danger of overemphasizing discourse. Talk is cheap. Political and social movement building is difficult. And with the Stanley approach to fascism, as well as with some of the approaches to Hindutva in Nepal, what you see is a sort of checking boxes approach. A leader said something, we check the box, He's making us versus them discriminations, this kind of thing, therefore we're on the path to fascism. So that's what I kind of want to get away from in this lecture. Focusing on the movement characteristics of Hindutva and the barriers to building an impactful Hindutva movement in Nepal that would resemble that of the Hindu heartland in India. For that reason, that sentence sounds terrible. It sounds like I'm advocating for Hindutva. It's not correct. For that reason, I won't be talking here about the Nepali constitution or the anti-secularist tendency in politics generally, because I think that that is a bit of a red herring if we are exploring Hindutva as a movement. I proceed by describing an ideal type of Indian Hindutva against which we can compare and contrast what passes for Hindutva in Nepal. Perhaps this is a crude method. After all, a future Nepali Hindutva may be a complex hybrid of Indian and Nepal-specific elements. But in the Gramscian sense of successfully fighting a war of position for control of civil society, Indian Hindutva is arguably one of the most successful social and political movements of modern times. This is not to say it has completed its work, or ever could, but it provides a model of social mobilization against which we can test the success or failure of its Nepali cousin. So let's characterize those core elements of Hindutva, and here I'm drawing on these recent monographs in particular. Some of you probably have read one or two of them. All of them have been very useful for trying to create a kind of ideal, typical idea of what Hindutva is in India. And I'll leave that up there for a few seconds, and we can come back to that at the end of the lecture as well. So, 4 elements which are synergistic in Indian Hindutva. Firstly, Hindutva is a movement of religious homogenization. I'd rather use that word than reform, which is a loaded word, of the complex overlapping layers of actual Hindu practice, crystallizing a simplified doxa focusing on Ram, the Gita, and certain daily ritual practices. As most scholars argue, this homogenization was strongly influenced by the Hindutva founders' experiences of the supposed success of Islam and Christianity in appealing to new classes of deracinated urbanites and newly mobile rural to urban migrants. Of course, I should note that this homogenization process is not complete in India, and it is hard to imagine it erasing all of India's religious diversity. Secondly, and related to the first point, Hindutva is a movement that replaces vertical status boundaries with horizontal status boundaries. In particular, boundaries of traditional caste status are replaced with boundaries of religious identity. In a stark sense, this means replacing traditional forms of caste hierarchy with new, highly policed boundaries between the Hindu community and the Islamic community in India. It also means, as Teltunde has argued, outreach to and co-optation of India's Dalit and Adivasi communities as members of this new, horizontally imagined Hindu community. Thirdly, Hindutva is a movement comprising social welfare in the broadest sense, including poverty relief, and more importantly, the inculcation of social discipline for youth in the form of activities at its branches, the shakas, of the various Sangh Parivar organizations. This is the part of Indian Hindutva most closely modeled on 20th century fascism, and is what Tanika Sarkar refers to as Hindutva's slow and patient cellular expansion into civil society. Finally, gluing it all together, Hindutva is a movement that works synergistically with political parties to achieve its ends. The BJP allows grassroots organizations to mobilize in Islamophobic campaigns such as love jihad or cow protection, or in welfarist activities, and works in synergy with these campaigns to win elections, then offering protection to the same grassroots groups to continue their activities. This has been documented and analysed by Tariq Thatcher in his important book, Elite Parties, Poor Voters, which I'll go back to. There you are. You can see it. It's on the top third book along. In terms of practical grassroots implementation, this package of Hindutva, a kind of actionable package, involves a synergy of shaka, mondir, school, sangster, and party in local communities across India. In other words, youth attend a local branch where they do martial arts, they read Hindutva texts, they are also affiliated with social welfare organizations, they worship at a temple whose priest has been handpicked by Hindutva outlets, and in some cases they study at a Vidya Bharati affiliated school. The local BJP will work behind the scenes in synergy with these groups, calibrating its election efforts with campaigns and mobilizations of organizations. For example, a love jihad or cow protection incident inevitably will appear prior to a key election. So I formulated this ideal, type of Indian Hindutva as a way to look more critically at the claims of a Nepali Hindutva, and to get away from the trend in writings on Hindutva in Nepal to focus on elite political discourse. So that's really the key point of this lecture. My argument is that this actionable package, the Shaka, Mandir, Sangster School, Party Synergy, doesn't exist in Nepal yet, except in embryo or in the dreams of certain activists in the terrain. The reasons for this are fairly clear, and I will go through them in turn in the following section by mapping Nepal realities against the ideal typical categories I have just described. So firstly, in terms of religious homogenization, as of 2025, Nepal's religious infrastructure is a substantial barrier to Hindutva's incursions. I will give one interview experience, which hopefully will be illuminating. In 2023, I spoke to the chair of Nepal's Astrologers Association in Bairua, a group that has been part of a loose coalition of Hindutva-adjacent activists, including Kathmandu-based gurus such as Pushparaj Purush and Chintamani Yogi. What stood out for me was that the chairperson was torn between admiring the success of the RSS and the BJP in India and a sentimental longing to preserve Nepal's, in his words, expensive traditional Hinduism, including mourning practices, local customs, rituals and festivals, etc. In his eyes, this traditional Hinduism in Nepal was under threat from Christian conversion, because Christianity was cheaper and more appealing to those in lower socioeconomic groups. He also believed, this is his formulation, not mine, that only an Indianized, a saffronized Hinduism might stand up to this subtle assault from Christianity. So like many conservative Hindus in Nepal, there is an envy of Indian Hindutva's political and social appeal, but also a wariness about its vulgar, plebeian character, and a rather desperate feeling that conservative Hindus are being forced to choose the Indian model of Hindutva because the alternative, meaning secularism and supposed Christian conversion, is worse. And obviously my point is that's not an attitude which is likely to make you a very effective mobilizer of something like a populist Hindutva in Nepal. It's a kind of regretful attitude. This is the best we can do. Another anecdote that illustrates a connected problem. A former research assistant of mine, who is a Janajati, had been attracted by Hindutva social media and memes concerning the threat of Christianity and Islam in Nepal. But he then heard that the guru, Pushparaj Purush, people know who he is? Pushparaj Purush? Most of you know. Whose ashram he had previously visited, had posted a Brahmin exclusivist post, casting doubt on whether Janajatis could ever be true Hindus in Nepal. So a potential recruit was lost. So again, these are not the kind of attitudes that are, going to make you an effective movement creator. Other evidence I could mention here is Nepal's current system of Sanskrit schools, which I found to be highly traditionalist, focused on educating poorer Brahmins from rural areas, not on co-opting a broader set of clients. I could talk about the locally controlled Guti system, the big, amorphous, probably corrupt religious trusts. I'm wary, however, of simply pointing to Nepal's religious heterogeneity and famous syncretisms, as these things can change, as they have in the Hindu heartland in India. It's more important, I think, to highlight the lack of intentional leadership in Nepal's religious community. A leadership that actually wants to go the Indian path toward homogenization of practice and organization. At the moment, there is too much localism and traditional casteism among Nepal's religious leaders to allow for Indian-style populist movement building. So points 2 and 3 on the PowerPoint slide there, about the creation of horizontal communities and about organizational synergies and welfarism, they can be dealt with together, since it is the organizations that would have to do the hard work of imagining a new horizontal community of Hindus in Nepal. There is a confusing array of Hindutva outlets operating in the Terai, which go under the general name of the Omkar family, Nepal's equivalent of the Sangh Parivar. These organizations do have real capabilities. They're not just, the imagination of elites in Kathmandu, as C.K. Lal has sometimes claimed. And I will highlight two ways in which they have shown increased capacity in recent years. Firstly, a basic event analysis using published sources suggests that over the last 20 years, these organizations are becoming more intentional rather than reactive. For example, 20 plus years ago, most anti-Muslim protests in the Terai happened as reactions to external events, such as the killing of Nepalis during the Iraq War. In the last 10 years, events seem to be more intentional. Firstly, through the organization of Hindu idol processions passing by mosques designed to provoke a backlash, and secondly, through social media manipulations and counter-manipulations designed to provoke reactive incidents, such as we saw in Nepalganj 18 months ago, where an alleged anti-Muslim blasphemy incident online turned into accusations of Muslim protesters raising the Pakistani flag at a municipal headquarters. These kind of events have real social consequences. Muslims interviewed in Nepalganj claimed that there was now a social-cultural divide emerging between Hindus and Muslims which hadn't existed before, with Muslim guests being asked to bring their own plates and spoons to festivals, which had not been the case in the past. Secondly, there is a distribution of Hindutva propaganda and rumours in person and in social media, an example of which I will show you here. Oh, there it is, right. So this is Sunni Islam ki Nangi Tasfir, so you can imagine it's just full of like rumours and sort of nonsense about the Prophet and all this kind of stuff. So this is the kind of thing which I guess they are getting from India, translating into Nepali. And there's really no room here to describe the flood of Hindutva-oriented sort of fake news on social media, a lot of it coming from the Indian side of the border. And as I am focusing on movement capabilities in the real world, I will pass over this important topic for now. But yeah, there's a lot of material like this floating around amongst these groups in the terrain. However, there are serious limits to these organizations too. Firstly, there is factionalism. We have repeated splits between organizations which are more traditionalist and pro-monarchist, and those which are trying to implement something more like populist Indian Hindutva. For example, the schisms between the MSS and the HSS in the past, and between Nepal Shiva Sen and Shiva Sen Nepal, among other similar factional splits. Secondly, there are geographical and demographic barriers. After the Ayodhya inauguration in, when was it? Was it February 2024? I think, yeah, early spring 2024. The geographical and demographic extent and limits of Hindutva mobilizations were clear. So obviously these kind of flags appeared, the Hanuman flags, in border cities, and obviously they'd been put there by organizations, given to shops to put up. But it was noticeable that the flags stopped appearing as soon as the demographics changed. For example, Nepalganj and Biratnagar were flooded with saffron flags when I visited, but Kolhapur and Itahari were not, let alone Dharan, where Kirat ethnic solidarities proved an impenetrable barrier to Hindutva encroachment. So if, this is a very crude line I've drawn where if I had an army of research assistants at the time, they could have actually quantified where we saw the saffron flags and where they started to disappear. Actually might have been an interesting exercise, because you could have correlated that with the demographics of the area. Similarly, Hindutva mobilization is very urban. So there's a geographical split north-south, but there's also an urban-rural split. Villagers I spoke to as part of the Fulbright project I was working on, who live in mixed Hindu-Muslim communities near Nepalganj, expressed surprise and bewilderment at the Hindutva activists riding in their truck/chariot and shouting Hindutva slogans. Many rural folks were sympathetic to Modi and to the Ayodhya inauguration, but were not being drawn into movement activities and found it strange. They still felt they were part of mixed communities and there was no kind of like formation of a Hindu-Muslim divide. In Kathmandu, movement activity is even more cagey. The organizations were suspicious even of Nepali research assistants when they approached them under the guise of being interested in the ideology. Proselytization activities in Kathmandu seem to be minimal. And these organizations are mostly sitting in grandiose buildings and not really doing much in the way of movement building. Even Pushparaj Purush, I heard, recently shut down his ashram and has retreated to an office building. When I explicitly asked activists in the Terai about the Shaka Mandir party model of India, activists understood the problem and suggested that it would be at least 5 to 10 years before these kind of systems could be established in Nepal. Indeed, as I will return to at the end of this talk, we need to know how many of these so-called Shakas in the Terai are real, what their demographics are, and how well connected they are to other types of organizations. Obviously, as a Western scholar, it was pretty unrealistic for me to sort of sit in one of these martial arts programs, and so I'm not really sure about the reality of some of them. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, let's turn to politics. Political synergy. Political synergy is especially poorly developed in Nepal compared to India. The Raprapa, the National Democratic Party, is poorly equipped to work on building Hindutva organizations and movements on the ground. Its leadership is fundamentally dismissive of building connections to the kind of middle and lower middle class fanatics and louts, and this is the words they used to me, Shamsha Rana, in an interview with him, called them fanatics and louts, who are the base of Hindutva in India. This should be fairly obvious to a Nepali audience who hear the leadership of Raprapa speak and recognize their patrician Anglophilic tone. At the base of the party, it is somewhat different. In Janakpur, I encountered a local level Raprapa cadre who was a genuine partisan of Hindutva. He was a Hindi-speaking person, had been trying to generate a love jihad scare in Janakpur. He was very frustrated that the central leadership had no interest in his campaign, the love jihad campaign. I interviewed him alongside a cadre from a Hindutva group, I think it was Nepal Shiva Sen. It was noticeable that both cadres, the RPP leader and the Shiva Sen cadre, were angrily accusing the other one of being so-called shout Hindus, or in the case of Shiva Sen, pay-per-protest agents of local political parties. This was a theme that was common across all of the locations I visited. Pro-Hindutva and anti-Hindutva respondents agreed that there was a shallow, politicized aspect to Hindutva activities. For example, at this event in Sattari, where is it? Oh, there it is. In 2023, it involved a Nepal HSS mobilization, but according to respondents in the area, the call for this mobilization came from local high caste associations who wanted to suppress and intimidate a Muslim candidate for mayor. In other cases, Hindutva adjacent rhetoric in cities like Nepalgunj is associated with trying to play vote bank politics, forming alliances between Hill Hindus and Madhesh Hindus against the Muslim population of the city, thus running interference with a possible Madhesh identity of Madhesh Muslims and Hindus that is the core of Madhesh Party's votes. Now, I'm not saying that Indian Hindutva doesn't engage in vote bank politics, obviously it does, but in India that is the tip of an iceberg of a broader grassroots organization. That organization is lacking in Nepal. Ironically, the hegemony of political parties over everyday life in Nepal, the corruption, the particization of everyday life, may act as a barrier to serious Hindutva movement building. Because winning elections in the short term is the focus of all parties, and party rent-a-mobs are not a good catalyst for movement building. What conditions all of these comparisons is the historically dependent way, let's go back to that slide I suppose, the historically path-dependent way in which Hindu conservatism has developed in Nepal. So there's a historical background to this. I won't linger on this as it will be familiar to this audience and has been summarized by scholars such as Tofan and many others. The key point here is that what passes for Hindutva in Nepal was tied to the institution of the monarchy, was traditionalist and elitist and casteist in nature, and was strongly opposed to the demotic populist aspects of Hindutva in India from the 19th century onwards. For example, the Arya Samaj was banned from Nepal under the Ranas, And despite rhetorical sympathies, activities of the RSS and other outlets were strictly monitored and controlled by the post-Rana monarchy. This is an underlying historical condition for the lack of those four features that I highlighted above. I should also, of course, say something about India's ambivalent role in Nepali Hindutva as it relates to these themes. India is ambivalent, in my opinion, because although it undoubtedly wants to raise the temperature in the Terai and has been plausibly accused of sending activists across the border and of directly funding pro-Hindutva politicians in Kathmandu, nevertheless, I suspect India is wary of supporting grassroots Hindutva movements that may take on, in the future, Nepali nationalist themes. This is part of a historical pattern that you're all very aware of. Indian Hindutva leaders fetishized and projected onto the true Hindu state to its north, but not as a potential ally in movement building, rather as a rhetorical trope, a kind of museum of pure Hinduism. This, of course, suited the interests of the Nepali monarchy, which, as I suggested, wanted nothing in the way of unruly populist middle-class movements on its territory. As in other cases in the past, which I don't need to mention, India wants to create a little bit of chaos in Nepal using the tools available, but then will attempt to turn the temperature down if there is a real danger of populist movements and parties strengthening. To summarize, Hindutva is a social and political movement, not just a discourse. Neither is anti-secularism per se the same as Hindutva. In India, over more than 100 years, a synergistic movement has fought a war of position in civil society using schools, organizations, the reorganization of religion, political parties, and the imagining of new horizontal symbolic boundaries. In Nepal, there are activists, mainly in the Terai, who would like to do the same, but two serious barriers stand in their way. So summarizing, firstly, what we could call royal Hindutva, under which we could group all of the hierarchical, pro-monarchical, upper caste networks associated with Nepal's ruling elite. And secondly, traditional Hinduism, the syncretic and multi-layered heterogeneous landscape of Nepal. At present, the political and organizational intentionality and leadership to overcome or transform these barriers is lacking in Nepal. So I'd like to end by suggesting a few avenues for research, which some of you might want to partake in. I'd like to propose 3 concrete research agendas that might help us diagnose the potential for Hindutva in Nepal. Most importantly, sociologists or anthropologists of religion could and should be exploring the micro-level attempts of RSS-type shakas, branches, to establish imagined communities of Hinduness in the Terai, in Nepal. Perhaps this would involve attending those branches to the extent that they even exist. Are there tensions that would be visible from field observation and interviews between the vertical biases of traditional upper caste Hindus and the horizontal tendencies of an Indian-style Hindutva mobilization? Or could it be that these branches exist in name only, lacking the welfarist outreach of their successful Indian cousins? Another 2 agendas are more cultural or diagnostic in nature. So the second thing is, are traditional forms of religion in Nepal being transmitted to younger generations? And if not, as seems likely to me, is there a vacuum that generic Hindutva dogma and Hindutva aesthetics might fill? This question arose to me when reading the excellent book Reciting the Goddess. Has anyone read this book? Or,
yeah.
Good. Reciting the Goddess by Jessica Birkenholtz on the Svastani cult and its accompanying narratives. Great scholarly achievement though the book obviously is, from a sociological point of view, I was puzzled by the implicit claim of the book that younger generations have maintained knowledge of the intricacies of this narrative. A narrative coterminous for the author with the heterogeneous complexity and layeredness of Nepali Hinduism. In a crude experiment, I asked 2 generations of the family I was visiting, this is Ram Gurum, raise your hand. There. And indeed, with a Gen X father and a Gen Z son, the Gen X father grew up with the narratives and vividly remembers the excitement of reading particular chapters of the Svastani manuscript in his village as a boy. The Gen Z son had never heard of the cult or the narratives. Asking around among some slightly older Gen Zs from the cult's heartland, in Kathmandu. A few of them knew of the festivals associated with the goddess, but couldn't give any details of the narratives or name the characters in it. I believe a sociologist of religion could explore this important topic about the transmission of tradition and its sociological implications, especially for the ideologies that might fill the gaps left in younger generations' spiritual explorations, for better or worse. And finally, somewhat similarly, where was it? Oh, there. An exploration of the diffusion of the Hindutva aesthetic in Nepal would be interesting. By Hindutva aesthetic, for example, take the new Shiva statue in Pudinkot, Pokhara, where I was last week. I remember the family I was with, the mother expressed surprise that this Shiva monument didn't include an easily accessible or prominent place to pray, at least compared with the outsized dimensions of the statue. Has this brand of cartoonish, macho gigantism, drawn originally perhaps from the Indian TV versions of the Hindu epics, become endemic in Nepal, or are there resistances to it? Are there other ways of capturing the Hindutva aesthetic, maybe through social media, memes, and so forth? So that would be a kind of micro-level project that could be quite interesting. Okay, well, I'll throw it open to the audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for a very thoughtful talk, the lecture that I think has taken us to a range of different themes, including some of the insights from your own fieldwork, but also engaging with some of the scholarship on Hinduism in India. So you've been great by giving us more time, Richard. So so we have about 30 to 40 minutes for question and answer. So before
and also contributions.
Yeah. Or comments, or questions, all welcome. So what we'll do is we'll take them in 2 or 3, if that's okay. Yeah. Please raise your hand, and could you just introduce yourself, just your name, and then the question. So first here, and the second here, and third here. So we'll take these 3 first, and then we'll go in turn.
First is somebody.
I'm Dinesh. I'm interested in like this.
Can't hear you properly.
Okay, I am Dinesh, and I'm asking some questions. It's good to know that somebody has carried out research on the infiltrating Hindutva in Nepal, and I have also some speculation that would match with research that was monarchical Hindutva and RSS based Hindutva. So and it is my speculation basically. So the RSS brand of Hindutva seems to be more prevalent in Tarai region, more in Madesh region, and the pro-monarchical brand of Hindutva or Hinduism, whatever we call, seems prevalent in hill region of Nepal. So, is there any possibility of any kind of cooperation or assimilation between these 2 brands of Hindutva? More recently, I think 2 months ago, one of the Hindutva organization disassociated itself from the monarchy instance. So that is the fact. So, and another fact is that we see the prevalent racism or a kind of regional biasness against Madesi people in Nepal. So this could be a barrier or not? This is my second question. And regarding the political spectrum, I haven't seen any political parties who are committed for secularism, be it is quote unquote communist parties or be a democratic party. Even Gagan Thapa, one of the senior leaders, he openly said that we don't need dharma nirapekshata, we need dharma sapekshata. I don't know what is the meaning of this statement, but it certainly hints that he is against the secularism. So, how we should comprehend the Hindutva regarding these information with with relation to the India's Hindutva.
Great. Let's go here. And then
Hello, I will be super quick. My name is Sabin Ninglebu, I'm a researcher, and we had a conversation in the past, Richard. There's no question here. Some reflections for you and the audience as well, to be engaged later or not. My vocation as a researcher is located more at the municipal scale. So, and it's much more concentrated in Janakpur and Ayodhya. I guess the essence of what I'm trying to say is, in what ways, in what nebulous ways, is Hindutva traveling across the borders? In what invisible ways are people imbibing the spirit of Hindutva without being fully conscious of it? On the one hand, at the everyday level. On the other hand, how is the urban planning authorities, how are they, both in Ayodhya and Janakpur, foregrounding or promoting certain ideas of urban planning and development and religious tourism as well as heritage preservation that contains within it the politics of Hindutva more than the aesthetics of Hinduism, right? And I'll end with a very short anecdote. Sometime in October 2023, I traveled with a theatre group called Mina, Mithila Natya Kala Parisad, based in Janakpur, which is probably the oldest theatre group in Nepal registered. It was quite a journey of those 10 hours across Bihar, and having spent few nights with the artists. Our conversations would be filled with laughter and everything, and all kinds of gossiping about the internal conflict within Mina. But what really caught my attention, and that stayed in my psyche, is this one thing that someone said in the middle of the conversation, which is that, out of context, in Ayodhya, Mandir to yahi banega. The temple will be built here, you know? And it was said with such ferocity and conviction, which is completely not in sync with the mood of the evening. And that is something that worries me as an individual, but I'm also trying to document as a researcher. And to me, it is these undercurrents that carry, let's say, the threats of Hindutva across the border as well. So like I said, it's just a sharing of anecdotes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll take the final one. I know that we'll come back to the next round. I think there's a hand here, and first, yeah, we'll take yours in the second round if that's okay. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Virat and I'm a writer. So, while you were presenting your, I think this leans more towards philosophy. So whenever I think about fascism, Hannah Arendt's theory of the banality of evil, that comes to my mind. And for people who are unfamiliar, so Hannah Arendt's work of the theory of the evil of banality is basically like how she found out this person, Adolf Eichmann. He was a Nazi operative. He was responsible for organizing, the transportation of millions of Jews. And so the philosopher Hannah Arendt, she basically found that person to be terrifyingly normal, just bland, regular person. So I kind of just wanted to pick your brain about, like, do you see that in people having this Hindutva ideology as well? Like, just wanted to know your thoughts.
Let's get these answered, and we'll go to the next round.
Well, it's not necessarily any easy answers from you. But yes, to go to Dinesh's point, yeah, it seems to me, in the paper associated with this presentation, I talk about this in the conclusion of that paper. There's a whole bunch of circles that have to be squared, right? The Madesh and the hills. And not just that, but I should have mentioned, obviously, that the hill Hindutva is more concerned with Christian conversion, whereas Tarai Hindutva is more concerned with Islam. Like you said, how do you square all of this with anti-Indian nationalism, with support for the monarchy or against the monarchy? At the moment, yes, I don't see any political entrepreneurs who could square all of those circles. But again, we shouldn't underestimate the power of charismatic authority, right? If it emerges. We don't see such a person. I don't think it's Durga Prasad or someone like that. But someone with a bigger brain and with more kind of political capacity could find ways to unify these movements that we perhaps can't even imagine. And obviously, yes, Sabine, thank you very much for your comments. And hopefully we'll get to work together someday on these kind of micro mechanisms. That'd be fascinating. And I noticed something similar, yeah, when you talk to these sort of, middle-class Hindutva activists, they're laughing and drinking beer and then suddenly they'll start talking about, love jihad and things like this, and it comes out of the blue, yes. Which kind of speaks to your point as well. What was the name, sorry? Birat, yes. Well, I mean, I'd be wary of throwing words like good and evil around. I'm not sure that's very helpful analytically. Maybe that goes back a little bit to my somewhat critique of Jason Stanley and this idea that we should sort of be categorizing certain ideologies as, beyond the pale. And so, I mean, there are reasons why people turn to these ideologies. Maybe Hannah Arendt can help in that respect as well. She talked about loneliness, right? Loneliness is the reason people turn to totalitarianism. So we might be looking for those deracinated, atomized individuals, right? Rural to urban migrants, people returning from overseas, people who don't have a kind of traditional social basis anymore. And they're the kind of people in India who turn to Hindutva, and they may be in Nepal as well. So I would say, I would focus more on Arendt's sociological interpretation of totalitarianism.
Great. So we can now move on to the next round of questions. I know there was a hand there. That's okay. Yeah. First. Yeah.
Hello. Yeah, my name is Abha. I'm doing a PhD in anthropology. I work on India right now. My first question to you was about the categorization you did of homogenization and welfarism in particular. I was thinking about how it almost has an air of like benevolence in how you're presenting Hindutva. Obviously you're very critical of it, but I'm just curious how you square the fact that Hindutva in India is also related to a worsening of caste antagonism in many parts of the country and like a lot of concentration of wealth and capital in certain groups of people with the aspects of the sort of cross-caste homogenization you talk about. So that was my first question, and I was also, you keep sort of moving between Hindu aesthetics and Hindu like sort of political culture. I was wondering if you could expand more on what you think the role of Hindutva aesthetics is in terms of its consequence for politics. And you make a pretty persuasive argument for there's no sort of institutional framework for Hindutva to exist in Nepal the way it does in India, but the sort of royalist, the anti-secular, king-loving Hindutva, like, what is at stake in calling it Hindutva versus not? I'm just curious, like, what the stakes of that terminology are for you in terms of thinking about the monarchy.
Yeah, that's great. I think, could you take mic in front? I think there's a hand just in front of you, and then there's a hand there.
Hello, this is Ekta. I just wanted to make a comment that I've noticed that in few local level, in few of the wards in Nepal, some certain parties, they introduce programs like a housing program and all for elderly women. And is this part of gaining votes by using religion? And they also spend quite a lot in rebuilding temples with no significance of heritage or anything, with no ties to history or anything. That is all.
Great, and I think there's a hand there at the back. We can't hear you.
My name is Arun Savare. I just want to know, during your studies and during your field studies in the Tarai border of Nepal, we have a humor in Nepal that recent Hindutva movement by the different political parties in Nepal, it is mostly influenced from the Indian political parties or Indian influence. So did you have that kind of reflection or perception on your studies or in your fieldwork activities? Thank you.
Yes, was Alba?
Yeah.
So she made a point about benevolence. Yeah, I mean, which obviously. Yeah, I mean, maybe the best way to put that is using Benedict Anderson's term of, imagined community. And an imagined community is not an egalitarian community, right? So what Hindutva does is it does create a symbolic horizontal boundary, right, between Hindus and Muslims. That doesn't in any way, and I don't think even they would claim, reflects a kind of egalitarianism economically or in any other way. And I mean, it does what fascism does, right? It creates a strong sense of xenophobia, a strong boundary between us and them. But it certainly never implies anything like sort of massive economic redistribution. I guess Teltumbe's, I can't pronounce his name very well, Teltumbe's work on Dalits and Hindutva, which I'll just screen back to, I'll put us, yeah. So the one on the far left there, Hindutva and Dalits, that's probably the best. How many people have actually looked at that book or read that book? Has anybody read the book? Oh, okay. Well, that's a good one to start with. I think that would be a great source book. He goes through just about every region of India, looking at how Dalits have been incorporated. And in urban areas, from what I remember, that means kind of getting the Dalit population of threatened, insecure factory workers on the side of Hindutva in labor competitions with Muslim labor, right? So there's, they're very clever, they're very cunning about offering symbolic and political co-optation to groups that might otherwise feel vulnerable. And I don't see anything like that in Nepal. Maybe some of you have seen it. I don't see the Rapapa capable of anything remotely like that. But in India they have, I think this is fairly recent too. I don't think this is something Hindutva was doing in India like 50, 60 years ago. So this is the way it's evolved into an inclusive movement. About aesthetics, I don't know if I can answer that well. I mean, there's a book, I can't quite remember what the question was about aesthetics.
Do you want to say that again? I think it was about the relationship between aesthetics and Hindutva politics. Yeah, so again, I guess it's this, machismo, so there's a gendered element to this. There's a book which is not on this by Vijayan on the gendered aspect of Hindutva, which I think is quite interesting in that regard. I should have put that book on the list. And so, the figure of Ram, this idea of a kind of assertive masculinity, these are the kind of things maybe we should be looking for traces of that in Nepal at the micro level. Ekata, yes, the welfare aspects, I mean, in a sense I'm just echoing what you're saying. That's the kind of thing that I'm trying to find out about. And Indian influence, I said something about in the paper version of this, I do talk in more detail. Definitely India is sending activists across the border. In the incident in Nepalganj in 2023, there's clear evidence that maybe 50% of the activists were coming across the border from India, going back across the border in the evening. People talked about, in Baratnagar, activists talked about Indian political parties inviting people for picnics, this kind of thing. Yes, absolutely, it's happening. But I'll go back to my original point, which is that I don't think India is doing this because they want to build a very strong, autonomous, populist Hindutva movement in Nepal, because that might be, in the long run, threatening for them.
My name is Toyana Batrai. Thank you, Richard, for this very comprehensive presentation. I was born in an Orthodox Hindu family in the Eastern Mountains and was trained initially in Sanskrit. I used to read Chandi and Gita and Veda, etc. Later I changed into English because English you can say, invaded, or English came as a major mainstream education of the country. Now my question is, you mentioned about Swastani, to illustrate your point, and I am wondering if you are observing some Koti homes that are like Jambori of Hindus in Kathmandu and in Pokhara, led by a lady preacher Radhika Dasi and so many guest speakers from all the way from London to India, and these ladies are trained for better or worse in India, Haridwar or Vrindavan or other Sanskrit institutions. My question is, I don't know whether this will fit into a research question or hypothesis, but have you ever taken note of these things, that these activities are run all the way from Itari to Dhangadi, and to Pokhara and other hill areas where they are sponsored to and raise a substantial amount of money. Who will audit it? I don't know, but they earn money also, and maybe some money comes from, as you said, from Indian supporters of these activities. I don't know. I cannot claim it, but I suspect. So I'm wondering if you have taken note of these Koti homes and every day, all the year round, preachings of Hinduism. Thank you.
Good. We do have time. There's one hand. Would there another hand at the back? No? Okay, let's take this one. Okay, wait.
Hello, my name is Suyog and I'm about to ask, talking about Hindutva aesthetics, I have noticed in recent years that they are using a lot of stickers and maybe flags with angry Hanuman pictures behind the cars, in top of people's houses. And how do you see this in context of your research and Hindutva movement as in general in Nepal?
Let's take one final one in this round.
Hello, my name is Chiswan Lama and I've been working in this education sector since 2014. I have a question for you. And if I'm allowed to ask W's question, I have no idea, but there is a W's question by the way. The question is regarding proselytism. Now, what kind of proselytism have you seen, if you have seen any? If there's any. Now, I mean, when in Nepal we talk about proselytism, people associate that with Christianism more often, right? Now, and yeah, and authorities are against of this apparently. Now, so I wanted to know if there have been any kind of Hindu proselytism in micro and macro level, because we've had years of Hindu monarchy and king as a traditional and charismatic authority. The conversion in Hindu is probably overlooked in micro level and macro level. So what's your take on it? Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you very much for that suggestion. No, I haven't researched that. I haven't visited one of those events, so I will do so. Thank you very much. That is an important contribution. Yeah, when I talked about a research agenda on aesthetics, that would be exactly the sort of thing one would be looking for. I think especially social media would be the place, Facebook, WhatsApp, where there are groups devoted to Hindutva conversations. I know people who've been drawn into that. These are kind of evidence we're looking for. And finally, I'm not 100% sure what you were saying about proselytization. You mean, you're talking about Hindutva as a kind of proselytization. I mean, you're highlighting that people focus on the threat of Christian proselytization, but maybe they should frame Hindutva in terms of proselytization as well. Is that the point you're making?
When we consider about conversion, we associate that with Christianity in Nepal.
That's a good way. I mean, that's one way to try to counter these things, I suppose, is to show the hypocrisy that people are obsessed with Christian conversion, but Hindutva, which draws, of course, on a lot of Christian and Islamic elements, right, is also, in a sense, a form of proselytization too. But good luck getting that over to the politicians, I think.
So we do have time for a couple of questions, if there are. Final chance. Any comments, questions?
I would add one.
Let's wait if there's another hand. You've already asked 3 questions, so we just there's another. Okay, why don't we go at the back and we'll come back to you. And I do have few comments or questions, so we'll come back.
So hi, my name is Abhinav and I'm a law student. So with regards to recent political trends, we see that there's a rise in the lingo of Omkar Parivar, or like a unity between traditional religions and the Hindu element. So what is does that play into the populist elements, and does that try to create a us versus them scenario in the sense of the natives and trying to incorporate the Janjatis along with the majority or like the Hindu population and try to push them against what they see as the main enemy or the conversions of Christianity that generally target them, as in their narrative? So how would that play into this entire Hindu argument, especially with its relation to political arguments brought forth with the recent monarchy protests and so on?
Let's take your only one question. Yeah, yes.
I forgot to ask that question. Yeah. There is a rampant tradition of doing arati stuff in every temple in Nepal, and I didn't used to witness that thing some decades ago. I have never seen those pandas doing arati, and there are some cultural aspects that is being copied by Pahari group. For example, the Mehendi Rasam, Hariyo Chura, that is green bangles in sound. This seems to be a seeping cultural front of Hindutva, but Pahari people, on the other hand, reject the Akhand Arat version of RSS. So how do we comprehend this?
Good. No, that's clear. Yes. I think he has one question.
Regarding the Arati, I had to say one thing, that I think it began in Haridwar. It is not even native to Banaras, it is not native to Janakpur, it is not native to Pokhara. So that's an element that we need to consider when we get excited over the Aratis all over the firmament. My question or my comment is, I don't know, because I came in late, I don't know if the matter of media has come into the discussion, but among the gatekeepers of Nepali society, you find by and large the social scientists, the civil society, the political leadership, everybody is running scared of Hindutva. Partly because of the enormous weight of Hindutva that comes in through WhatsApp and YouTube and other channels, and Indian television channels. So there's quite a pressure there, and because there is no backup from the social science sector, in my view, the politicians are not given any backup to speak out what they even may believe in. But of course, a lot of politicians who believe perhaps this is the way to go to garner votes in the future, like Mr. Modi has in northern India. But about the media, I believe that there are attempts by Hindutva forces south of the border who realize that the media is a crucial sector in Nepal in terms of influencing both the social media and the influencers as well as the general public, that there have been tours organized to Indore and the BJP headquarters, and if not from Kathmandu, then across the land border, so that nobody in Kathmandu notices. So there's quite a significant silence in media as well with regard to Hindutva and all that it could do to Nepali society as a whole.
Yeah, in a sense, those were three observations which I agree with. So you're right, you were talking about the new religious customs. Yeah, that was very interesting. Yeah, I need to collect incidents of those. I mean, obviously I'm focusing more on the political, social movement aspects, but I definitely need to learn. I'm not a scholar of religion. So these subtle changes to Nepali religion are something I really would love to investigate. About Janajatis and this attempt to sort of create a new imagined community, I mean, I think, well, they can do that in theory, but they have to stop excluding actual Janajadis from their movement. In the leadership in Nepal of these organizations is very casteist, very upper caste. Indian Hindutva evolved to deal with that problem. It took it a long time, because I think initially it was also very upper caste, very casteist. You could argue it still is in many deeper senses, but at least organizationally they've learned how to co-opt people from other groups, and I don't think I have seen that in Nepal yet. So I think that just that nice example of my research assistant who was getting drawn into the movement and then was repelled from it, right, when he got this sense of the casteism coming from some of these gurus. And thank you very much. Yeah, absolutely, to Konaka, that's exactly right. And in the Terai, a lot of these incidents are manipulated through Indian television and Indian social media. There's a running narrative that Muslims are taking over Nepal. Pakistan is allegedly using them to, and there's this obsession with security on the border, which is projects onto Nepal a lot of these anxieties in India.
Great. I don't see any hands. I do have 2 or 3 questions / comments. You don't need to answer them, but I have a couple of empirical questions, but also a methodological one. To start with, why take India as a reference point for a research on Hindutva, given that you're working in the context of Nepal, where until recently we had Hindu monarchy, right? The reason for that is because much of the presentation you talk about the sort of features that you explained on the slide, that we don't see those, particularly around social mobilization, institutional structure, organizational structures in Nepal. Therefore, maybe we are not quite there. I was asking, similar to what Sabine was asking earlier, instead of saying what do we not have, should you not be looking at what can we observe in terms of the influence of Hindutva? And that's a methodological question, I think. The second question, I think, which we just began to discuss a little bit, is you sort of talk about the kind of the big picture, largely in relation to the organizational structure, or in terms of the discursive aspect, or also partly in terms of the aesthetics aspects. But I thought what was missing was the aspect of the role of brokers, or might usually call intermediaries. Who are these people who are doing this work of translation of Indian Hindutva in the Nepalese context? Who are these intermediaries? Who are these actors who actually play quite an important role in translation and brokerage of those political ideals and ideas and organizational structures, and creating those infrastructures? The third question, I think we did talk about a little bit in terms of, of course, Hindutva in India very much, sort of thrives on the idea of the other. Who is the other in the Nepalese context, right? So I thought if you could just maybe, explore that in general, or talk about that in your response. Finally, you kept mentioning, India wants this, or India does not. India is not a monolithic state, even if you take that. I think it's been very well established in the Nepal scholarship, but also broadly any sort of anthropological or political science literature would indicate that we can't really think of India imposing Hindutva. There's obviously the BJP, the Hindutva politics. Indian state has various arms. There is Lucknow, so you could read it in multiple different ways. So I was going to kind of say that we shouldn't just understand India as a monolithic sort of state out there trying to sort of impose Hindutva. Take your wish if you want to take those as comments.
All of those are comments that I'd have to think about for a very long time. So, I love the idea of brokers. Yeah, that's a great one. The people who are actually translating materials. For example, there's even a book called Nepali Hindutva came out recently, which I didn't talk about in the presentation, trying to sort of translate Savarkar's ideas into the Nepali context. So yeah, that would involve looking through a lot of the materials and really going back to the Terai and doing more in-depth interviews. Yeah, you're right about the other as well. There's even a crude quantitative element to that, isn't there? That there's not, in a sense, there's not enough Christians and Muslims in Nepal to motivate an other. I mean, they try their best through these, love jihad and all these, like in Nepal, these hysterical campaigns against Pakistani influence. And the Christian stuff is obviously pervasive on social media. But at the moment, yeah, maybe there's a quantitative limit. I mean, if you add up Christians in Nepal, it's only about, 6 or 7% of the Nepali population. And it may be quite hard to generate a sense of otherness with just such a small minority. Maybe there's, sociological history which we could look at to help us with that. And then the stuff about Lucknow and obviously the Yogi Adityanath and those very particular connections. Yeah, I talk about that in my paper, but I didn't mention it in the presentation. Thank you so much for those great observations.
Thank you so much, Richard, for answering all those questions. And for, I think, if I were to summarize, obviously I wouldn't be able to summarize, but I think the take-home lesson for me was, I think you've basically taken a big rock, out. You've allowed us to kind of unearth what are the sort of questions we should be asking, what are the research projects we should be thinking about, what sort of questions we should be thinking about when we explore the process of what you call saffronization or not in the context of Nepal. So thank you for that, for allowing us to ask those questions, and thank you to the audience for asking very thoughtful, engaging, and very valuable questions. So I'll end here, and thanks to the organizers again, and I'm sure, Richard, you're here if people would like to kind of briefly have an informal chat with him. Before I conclude, on behalf of the organizers, I think as it is the tradition in these lectures, I would like to hand over this beautiful mug to enjoy your coffee or tea or whatever. That's it. Thank you very much.